What if the very foundation of the monarchy, its most carefully guarded relationship, was nothing more than a house of cards, waiting for a whisper to bring it crashing down? It began with silence, not a roaring scandal, not a front-page splash, but the eerie, strategic quiet that always seems to precede something earth-shattering in royal circles. Then came the murmurs, then the flickers of chaos, and finally, the implosion. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. King Charles, once seen walking hand in hand with Queen Camilla, was now spotted alone, stern-faced, distant, escorted by aides who seemed more like guards than staff. No shared engagements, no birthday statements, not even the customary smiles for the cameras. Something was off, and then everything erupted. Papers screamed, royal marriage in crisis. Paparazzi flooded the mall. Clarence House locked its gates. And across the United Kingdom, from the pubs of Liverpool to the drawing rooms of Surrey, one question echoed like a thunderclap. Had King Charles really declared divorce from Queen Camilla? If so, why? Why now, after decades of resilience, after weathering the storm of Diana's death, the Camillagate tapes, the coronation protests? Why destroy the one alliance he had fought so hard to legitimize? The answer, as it turns out, is far darker and far more personal than anyone imagined. Because this wasn't a strategic divorce. It wasn't a political repositioning. It wasn't even a case of growing apart. It was betrayal. Shocking, personal, reprehensible. And when the truth finally emerged, it sent shockwaves through the monarchy, the church, and every institution that had once stood behind them. But before we reveal exactly what Camilla did, and who she allegedly did it with, we need to understand what this relationship really was beneath the surface. Because this wasn't a typical royal marriage. It was the monarchy's most explosive gamble. Let's rewind. Charles and Camilla's love story was always painted as a tale of fate interrupted. Lovers torn apart by duty, scandal, and timing, only to find their way back to each other decades later, bruised but triumphant. The public was told it was redemption, a second chance, the end of tragedy. But behind palace doors, there were cracks, big ones. Charles, now in his 70s, had grown weary of the endless public scrutiny. Camilla, too, carried the burden of being seen, unfairly, some might argue, as the villain of the Diana saga. Together, they clung to routine, ritual, public image. But love? That was a question too few dared to ask. What happens when the public illusion becomes more important than the private reality? Inside sources, who, until recently, would have taken their secrets to the grave, have now begun to whisper. And what they reveal is harrowing. Arguments behind closed doors. Disappearances. Affairs, not just alleged, but documented. Power struggles between courtiers. Surveillance within the palace. And a growing list of people who were either fired or silenced. You see, this isn't just a story about a marriage. It's a story about a monarchy at war with itself. A story where loyalty became a bargaining chip and betrayal was currency. And the betrayal didn't just come from Camilla. The betrayal came from within Charles's own circle. People he trusted, mentored, even loved. People who exploited the chaos, who picked sides, who weaponized secrets, and ultimately, who made sure those secrets found their way into the public. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because there's one night in particular, one overlooked dinner between Charles and Camilla, that historians will point to in the future and say, that was the moment it all began to unravel. A dinner filled with passive smiles, carefully worded pleasantries, and an envelope placed quietly beneath Charles's wine glass. An envelope that would crack the crown from within. Let's linger here for a moment. Imagine being Charles. You've finally ascended to the throne after waiting a lifetime. Your entire reign, short as it's been, hinges on stability. You need allies. You need calm. You need your wife. And then she does this. What did the letter say? Why was it handwritten and sealed with her private crest? Why did it reference Australia and a mistake I can't take back? Charles read it once. Then again. Then he left the room. He didn't speak to Camilla for 4 days. By the time he re-emerged, his face was different. Hardened. Closed off. As if the man who had once waited patiently for love had decided enough was enough. Still, the public didn't notice. Not yet. Because they weren't meant to. The palace machine kicked into gear. Press releases about shared commitments, staged appearances at charity events, smiling photos of the couple attending services together. But insiders saw the shift. And so did Charles's sons. William, furious, protective of the throne. Harry, distant, perhaps too quiet. Even aides began choosing sides. This wasn't a divorce in the legal sense yet. It was a divorce of purpose, a split in power, a fracture in trust. But the dam would break. And when it did, the fallout would be biblical. That's when the UK erupted. And we're not talking metaphorically. Thousands began protesting outside royal residences, some in support of the king's courage, others defending Camilla as a scapegoat. Social media spiraled into frenzy. Hashtag King Charles divorces Camilla. Hashtag not my queen. Hashtag down with the crown. Talk shows, newspapers, late-night comedians, all flooded the airwaves with speculation. Political commentators began questioning whether Charles's reign had been irreparably damaged. Republican sentiment, long dormant in the UK, began rising again. And in the midst of it all, Charles said nothing. Not a single statement. Not a word. Just silence. But silence, in this case, was not weakness. It was the prelude to a reckoning. Behind the scenes, legal teams were mobilized. Church officials were briefed. The Prime Minister was warned. And the royal household began preparing for something that hadn't happened since the days of Henry VIII. A sovereign divorcing his queen consort. But this time, it wasn't about succession or producing an heir. It was about revenge. It was about betrayal. And it was about reclaiming control over a monarchy that had begun to slip through the king's fingers. And still, we haven't told you the worst part. Because what Camilla allegedly did wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just disloyalty. It was a calculated, strategic, and cold-hearted maneuver, one that some insiders claim may have been brewing for years, one that involved another man, one that may have involved illegal surveillance, and one that left Charles broken and enraged. But before we reveal what was inside that letter, before we show you who the other man was, and before we take you inside the private confrontation that shook Windsor Castle to its core, we need to go back to a specific night, back to where it all began. Because once you understand what happened at that dinner, you'll understand why Charles chose to do the unthinkable, and why, for the first time in modern history, the monarchy may never be the same. What happened that night? The answer will make you question everything you thought you knew about the royal family. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the most powerful man in Britain realized he'd been lied to? In his own home, over his own dinner table, by the one person the entire world said he loved most? It was a Tuesday evening. Quiet. Too quiet. No state dinners. No press events. No visiting diplomats or charity galas. Just the king and queen alone at Clarence House, or so it seemed. The menu? Traditional, but intimate. Wild mushroom risotto, Camilla's favorite, paired with a glass of Chateau Lafite 1982, Charles's most sentimental vintage. A nod, perhaps, to their early courtship days. A way of pretending things were still what they used to be. But the atmosphere? Frosty, measured, tense in a way even the staff couldn't ignore. One footman, later dismissed under mysterious circumstances, told a friend in confidence. It wasn't the kind of silence you get after an argument. It was the kind of silence you feel before a storm. And the storm was coming. Because midway through that dinner, as the silver clinked and Camilla smiled politely over her wine glass, she reached into her clutch and placed a sealed envelope underneath Charles's hand. No words, no explanation, just a brief squeeze of the fingers and a look, unreadable, cold. Charles froze. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't habit. It wasn't her. He waited until dessert was cleared. Then, without a word, he rose from the table, envelope in hand, and retreated to the study. Alone. What was in the envelope? Not a love letter. Not an apology. But a confession. And not just any confession. A timed one. Meant to get ahead of something. Meant to soften a blow that was already, inevitably, on its way to the public. The wording was vague. Camilla never wrote directly, never exposed herself fully, but the implications were unmistakable. I made a terrible mistake in Sydney. I never meant for it to go that far. Far? Far with whom? Charles read the line again. His mind raced. Then came the line that made his stomach drop. He said he'd keep it quiet, but I think someone else saw us. There may be photos. Silence. He reread it. Once. Twice. 3 times. Photos. Charles, the King of England, had just received written confirmation that the Queen Consort may have been caught with another man on a royal tour. It was the kind of sentence that, in any other family, might spark a week of arguments, counseling, maybe a temporary split. But this was not any other family. This was the House of Windsor. And this wasn't just betrayal. It was scandal with geopolitical consequences. What if the tabloids got hold of this? What if the Australian press had photos? What if the man involved wasn't just a stranger, but someone known, someone dangerous? Charles stood in the study for over an hour. No aides. No Camilla. No security. Just silence and the weight of a monarchy in his hands. Now here's the twist. This wasn't the first time Charles suspected something. There had been signs. Little ones. Camilla taking private calls late at night. The unusually long stopover in Sydney. Her sudden interest in digital privacy, encrypted phones, new passwords. All things that, for decades, she had openly mocked. But Charles had brushed it off. After all, hadn't they survived worse? He had cheated on Diana. He had endured public humiliation. He had fought for Camilla's acceptance for decades. Could he really now believe that she would betray him? And yet, here was the proof. A letter. Her own words. Her own guilt. And the kicker? She had ended it with a request. I think we should consider spending some time apart. For the crown's sake. Time apart. That was royal code for divorce. Now pause for a moment. Ask yourself this. What would you do if the one person you thought you had rescued, the one person you fought your entire country to be with, suddenly told you, in writing, that she had betrayed you and wanted out? Would you scream? Would you cry? Charles didn't either. He walked calmly back into the dining room. Camilla was gone. Not upstairs. Not in the garden. Not waiting in the sitting room with her usual post-dinner tea. She had left Clarence's house without a word. That was the moment the king knew. Everything had changed. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. Because that same night, the very same hour, in fact, British tabloids received an anonymous tip. Something's coming. Watch Clarence's house. Check the files from Australia. A scandal's about to explode. Who sent it? That's still unclear. Some believe it was a disgruntled aide. Others say it was someone close to the alleged other man. But one theory, whispered among royal staff, chilled even the most seasoned courtiers. Camilla sent the tip herself. Why? To control the narrative. To get ahead of it. To make Charles look like the emotional, reactive one. The man who couldn't handle her independence. Twisted? Yes. Impossible? Not in the Windsor playbook. You see, Camilla wasn't just queen consort. She was a survivor. A strategist. She knew how the press worked. She had clawed her way from being branded the Rottweiler to being crowned queen beside her lover. She knew that in public perception, the one who leaks first wins. So while Charles sat in silence, gripping that letter, the world was already being primed for a palace meltdown. And it worked. By morning, headlines were cryptic but suggestive. Storm brewing at Clarence's house. Unusual absence of Queen Camilla at morning event. Palace insiders report, emotional evening between royal couple. Social media caught fire. Speculation ran wild. And still, Charles said nothing, not even to his sons. William wasn't informed. Harry, estranged and distant in California, learned about the scandal the way most of us did, from a trending post on X. But that night, that single Tuesday night, would ignite a chain of events that no one, not even the king, could control. Because just 3 days later, the Australian press released a blurry, zoomed-in photograph of Camilla standing far too close to a tall man in a tailored suit, laughing beneath the golden lights of a Sydney rooftop bar. The caption? Queen Camilla's mystery man. The dam had cracked. Within hours, international outlets picked up the story. Camilla's spokesperson went silent. Clarence's house refused comment. And Charles? He vanished from public view entirely. But something was brewing behind the scenes. Because as the media frothed and the public speculated, Charles was not broken. He was furious. And he was preparing a response. Not a statement, not a press release. But something far more ancient. Far more dramatic. Something only a king could do. But before we get to that royal response, we need to ask a much darker question. Who was the man in Sydney? Why was Camilla so desperate to warn Charles before the photo leaked? And why were MI5 surveillance logs from that night quietly removed from palace archives? The answer lies not just in Sydney, but in the corridors of power that surround the crown itself. And what we're about to uncover next could bring down more than just a marriage. It could unravel the entire monarchy, because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the biggest secret of the royal divorce wasn't just in the letter, but in the whispers of those who served the palace? The ones who saw everything and said nothing until now. Clarence House, Kensington Palace, Balmoral, Highgrove, Sandringham. These aren't just royal residences. They're living machines. Behind every gilded doorway and antique tapestry is an ecosystem of staff. Cleaners, chefs, chauffeurs, personal aides, wardrobe assistants, security guards, communications officers, equerries, private secretaries. And they don't miss anything. They know who orders what for breakfast. They know when a royal is crying in the bathroom. They know when a vase is thrown across the hall. And sometimes, they know when the king's marriage is dying before the king even does. For years, the palace staff has operated under an ironclad code of silence. Loyalty, discretion, professionalism. But what happens when that silence is broken? What happens when the betrayal is so deep, so unsettling, that even the most devoted butler can't keep it to himself? This chapter isn't about speculation. It's about testimony, leaked, verified, and damning. It begins with a man known only as D. A former footman who worked at Clarence House for nearly 6 years. D kept to himself, rarely spoke to the press, and had quietly moved on from royal service. Until everything exploded. Weeks after the photo of Camilla and the mystery man in Sydney hit the tabloids, D contacted an investigative journalist under a pseudonym. He was careful, nervous, but determined. He didn't start with drama. He started with dinner napkins. We always set the table with personalized napkin folds. One night in March, I set the table for 2, as usual. I placed Camilla's napkin on her right side, folded into a swan. That's how she liked it. But the next morning, the napkin was untouched. Strange, he thought. She hadn't stayed for dinner. Later, in the private quarters, he saw something even stranger. One of Camilla's overnight bags, the one she used for international travel, missing. She always kept it in her closet. Suddenly, it wasn't there. When he asked a senior aide if Camilla had gone somewhere, he was told bluntly, "Don't ask questions you're not paid enough to answer." But D wasn't the only one noticing oddities. There was Linda, a longtime palace cleaner, who confided in a former colleague that she'd been instructed to burn a stack of personal correspondence from the Queen consort, something she had never been asked to do before. "I've shredded documents. I've filed hundreds. But burn them? That's a first. The contents?" She caught a glimpse of one line before the flames took it. He said the room was secure, but I couldn't stop shaking after. After what? After who? More disturbing still was what the head of royal security discovered. An internal audit showed that during Camilla's trip to Australia, she had overridden normal communication channels, opting instead for a private, encrypted messaging app not approved for official royal use. Why would a queen consort need encrypted messages outside the royal communications system during a public royal tour? The answer may lie in a name. A name that, according to multiple staff members, was whispered late at night between Camilla and her personal assistant. A name only heard by those who passed through the private hallway between the Queen's drawing room and her study. Marcus. The assistant once slipped and referred to Marcus in front of the chief equerry during a logistics meeting. Who's Marcus? No one answered. Not officially. But within days, the assistant was reassigned to a non-royal office and eventually left for personal reasons. Then there's the royal chef. Known in the press as Chef M, he was responsible for preparing meals for Charles and Camilla at Highgrove. He noticed something peculiar during their summer stay. For 2 weeks straight, she kept asking for beetroot salad. Always at 7:30 p.m., always alone. Charles wasn't there. She said she was on a new diet. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part? She never touched the salad. She'd come downstairs, check her phone, wait, then go back up. The food stayed untouched. Chef M later learned, through kitchen gossip, that a silver Range Rover had been parking near the servants' gate during that time. Windows tinted, engine running. Nobody logged it. No records exist. but multiple gardeners remember seeing it. One said it had diplomatic plates. Now ask yourself, why would a queen consort need to sneak someone in? During a royal retreat, through the servants' gate? And more importantly, who had enough influence to get in without being recorded? Here's where things get darker. A palace tech officer, who had access to the royal CCTV system, reported that the footage for the service gate during that period was corrupted. Not deleted, not erased, just scrambled, unusable. According to internal protocol, this kind of corruption should never happen. Especially not on cameras linked to royal residences. But it did, twice, and only during times when Camilla was home and Charles was away. Coincidence? Or cover-up? Now let's talk about the dogs. Yes, the dogs. Charles and Camilla are known for their love of Jack Russell Terriers. But in the weeks leading up to the divorce rumors, palace staff noticed something strange. Charles had stopped letting the dogs sleep in the royal suite. He said they'd been too anxious, barking at night, scratching at the door, one source revealed. But others whispered that Charles wasn't talking about the dogs. He was talking about Camilla. She'd started sleeping in the guest wing, the insider said. Told us she needed more rest. But we all knew something was wrong. They weren't talking. They were only ever in the same room during public engagements. That silence began to infect the staff. Departments started avoiding each other. Communications were funneled through intermediaries. One royal page was overheard saying, "We're living in two palaces now, even though it's the same building." Then came the firings. 6 long-term staffers let go in a single week. No explanations. Most of them had worked directly with Camilla. None gave interviews. None have resurfaced in other royal residences. One former guard claims they were all paid large severance packages with NDA clauses that were unusually aggressive, even for royal standards. Why the purge? What were they about to reveal? And then came the most chilling detail of all. A junior maid, only 22 years old, told her aunt, who later shared it anonymously, that she once walked in on Camilla speaking on the phone in hushed tones. She said, "He knows. I told him. But the photos haven't dropped yet. If they do, I'll be buried. He'll never forgive me." The maid was too frightened to report the breach of protocol. But now, looking back, she believes she overheard the moment the queen consort realized everything was about to collapse. And perhaps it was. Because the very next day, Camilla canceled her appearance at a children's literacy event. Citing mild exhaustion, she retreated to Ray Mill House, her private Wiltshire estate. But insiders say she wasn't alone. The same silver Range Rover was seen exiting the gates just before dawn. It didn't return, and neither, it seemed, did Camilla's control over the narrative. Because 1 week later, the media dropped a bombshell. A former staffer, anonymous but verified, gave an interview to an international outlet. "I served both of them for years," the voice said. But only one of them betrayed the throne. And it wasn't the king. The UK held its breath. Clarence House issued a one-line response. No comment. And then, silence. Which leaves us here, with more questions than answers. Who is Marcus? Why was the security footage wiped? Who else inside the palace knew, and chose not to tell the king? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, if Camilla could orchestrate this much in secret, what else is hidden in those walls? Because someone inside the royal machine helped her, and someone inside is still covering for her. But that trail of silence is about to snap. Because next, we follow the clues to Australia. And what happened on that rooftop bar in Sydney might just blow the entire royal institution wide open. What Camilla did there, and who she did it with, would make the king's silence seem like mercy. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the betrayal didn't happen in Buckingham Palace, but 10,000 miles away, under the bright lights of Sydney, with cameras rolling, royal protocols ignored, and one deeply intimate moment caught on film? It was supposed to be a routine goodwill tour. Officially, it was framed as a soft power charm offensive. Unofficially, it was a cleanup operation, a way for the queen consort to rebuild public favor after a string of unflattering headlines and declining approval ratings, especially among younger Australians. Camilla was sent to Australia alone. Charles remained in the UK, citing a packed domestic schedule, though insiders whispered that he was already exhausted, physically, politically, and emotionally. In hindsight, that absence may have been a calculated risk. Because what Camilla did in Australia would ignite a fuse under the monarchy. The trip began like most others. Photo ops with schoolchildren, wreath-laying ceremonies, champagne toasts with state premiers, customary jokes about koalas and Vegemite, and of course, the carefully choreographed, candid moments that the press love. But within 48 hours, something was off. Camilla's schedule was being quietly rearranged. Engagements shortened, logistics rerouted, gaps added where there were previously back-to-back appearances. Her security team was told to stand down for one evening, a highly unusual order for a traveling royal. But perhaps most curious of all, her sudden closeness with a man few in the press pool initially noticed until it was too late. He was introduced publicly as Marcus Dalton, a British-born, Sydney-based consultant, assisting with Commonwealth liaison. Mid-40s, former Royal Navy. Oxford-educated, polished, charismatic, always one step behind Camilla. Too close for a mere handler, too quiet to be a proper advisor. He wasn't listed in official press briefings. He wasn't photographed on arrival. But by the third day of the tour, he was at Camilla's side at nearly every private function. It began with proximity, then familiarity, then intimacy. One journalist captured a throwaway moment during a cultural reception at Sydney's Powerhouse Museum. The footage was never aired. It wasn't scandalous at first glance. Camilla leans in. Dalton whispers something. She laughs. He places his hand briefly on her lower back. A fleeting gesture, but one that screamed of comfort, of trust, of something far beyond professional. And it didn't stop there. That night, Camilla skipped the official dinner at Government House. The press was told she was tired and retiring early. But CCTV from a nearby rooftop bar, footage later leaked to the Australian media, showed something very different. A woman matching Camilla's description, hair swept up in her signature style, wearing a simple silk blouse. No security, no assistants, no press, just her. And Dalton. They weren't sitting. They were standing at the edge of the balcony, looking over Sydney Harbor, shoulders touching, her hand on his chest, his face, close enough to whisper directly into her ear. Then a kiss. It wasn't passionate. It wasn't rushed. It was deliberate. The kind of kiss you only give someone when it isn't new, but familiar. The footage ends there, but the fallout was just beginning. The video was anonymously submitted to two rival news outlets, the Daily Telegraph, Australia, and the Mail on Sunday, UK. Only the Telegraph ran the story, in blurred screenshots, citing an anonymous tipster with links to British intelligence. They didn't name Camilla directly, but they didn't need to. The internet exploded. Reddit threads dissected the footage frame by frame. TikTok creators did side-by-side analyses comparing the woman's earrings to ones Camilla had worn earlier that day. X, formerly Twitter, trended for 48 hours straight under the hashtag #CamillaCaught. Still, no official response from the palace. But back in London, the walls were shaking. Charles received a call at 3:37 a.m. London time from his press secretary. The voice on the other end was trembling. "Sir, you need to see this before the morning papers run it." Within minutes, he was looking at a screenshot. Low-res, zoomed, but unmistakable. He didn't speak. He didn't call Camilla. He didn't summon his sons. He ordered his valet to prepare the Red Room. Why? Because that's where kings handle personal crisis, where abdication letters are drafted, where emotional containment becomes strategy. But Charles wasn't strategizing. Not yet. He was seething. This wasn't some private affair. This was international. It happened on foreign soil, during a royal tour, under the eyes of the Commonwealth. And worst of all, it was caught on camera. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was geopolitical. Because as many forget, Australia is a constitutional monarchy. The king is still the symbolic head of state. And now, the Queen Consort had been captured on Australian soil, compromising that role. The Republican movement in Australia capitalized immediately. Activists held rallies across Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. Placards read, "Not our Queen. Bring the crown home. Royalty is rotten." Petitions circulated demanding an official apology from Buckingham Palace. Meanwhile, Camilla had gone silent. She cancelled the remainder of her tour and returned to Ray Mill House in Wiltshire, avoiding London altogether. Charles refused to receive her. For days, she was in exile. And yet, no resignation, no apology, no public statement. Nothing but tightly controlled silence. Behind closed doors, the palace PR machine was at war with itself. Half wanted to deny everything. Half urged Charles to get ahead of it with a carefully worded divorce announcement. But Charles wasn't in a mood to listen. He wasn't thinking in press releases. He was thinking in legacy, in history, in vengeance. He began revisiting ancient protocols, from royal prerogatives to ecclesiastical options for annulment. He summoned advisors from the Church of England, legal historians, archivists, not to debate options, but to prepare action, because this wasn't going to be a quiet separation. This was going to be a reckoning. And yet, one figure remained oddly silent. Marcus Dalton. Who was he, really? Why did the palace approve his involvement in the first place? And how did he gain such unfettered access to the Queen Consort? That's where the story turns again. Because a parliamentary staffer, who wished to remain unnamed, claims that Dalton once worked as a consultant for the Foreign Office, specializing in Commonwealth soft diplomacy and counterintelligence. If true, this changes everything. Because that means Camilla may not have just fallen for a man. She may have fallen for someone trained in disinformation, influence, and infiltration. And if Dalton was still active, or worse, working under contract, that kiss wasn't just betrayal. It was espionage. Suddenly, Charles wasn't just furious. He was scared. Because if Camilla had been compromised, even emotionally, by someone with ties to British intelligence or foreign governments, the entire monarchy was now exposed. Communications, schedules, vulnerabilities, all of it. And guess what? That's when the calls started. Anonymous, untraceable. Threats? No. Warnings. The messages were simple. Each one began with a single line. Tell the king to stop digging. Then silence. But Charles didn't stop. He doubled down. Security around Clarence House was reinforced. Camilla's digital footprint was scrubbed. And an internal investigation was launched, not by Scotland Yard, but by a private firm specializing in counterintelligence. Meanwhile, journalists began circling like sharks. The press had the footage. The public had the story. But no one had the full truth. Until now. Because what Camilla did next shocked even her harshest critics. She didn't apologize. She didn't retreat. She didn't deny the kiss. She held a private meeting with her legal team and began drafting a contingency plan. A memoir. Not just a rebuttal. A weapon. A document detailing her truth, including years of palace manipulation, personal loneliness, and, most dangerously, excerpts from Charles's private letters. One insider described the document as nuclear. Another called it a manifesto in pearls. Whatever it wasn't submission. Camilla was preparing for war. And Charles? He was preparing for something older. Something few remembered, but every royal feared. A declaration. Not through the courts, not through the press, but through ancient royal privilege. Because a king, especially one betrayed on foreign soil, still holds power that most forget exists. And what he was about to invoke hadn't been used in over 2 centuries. But before he could sign the papers, before he could summon the archbishop, before he could release the official statement, Camilla vanished. Just days after returning from Australia, she disappeared. No sightings, no statements, no security trails. One moment, she was preparing for war. The next, gone. And the only clue left behind, a torn page from her journal, with just 4 words. He warned me first. Who is he? Is it Marcus? Is it Charles? Or someone else entirely? Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the man who shattered the king's heart wasn't a stranger at all? What if he'd once been like a son to Charles, trusted, nurtured, elevated, only to twist the knife when it mattered most? Every royal scandal needs a villain. But sometimes, the real villain is the one who walks the corridors smiling, holding open doors, offering counsel with bowed head and carefully measured tones. Sometimes, the betrayer wears a crown-adjacent halo. Not paparazzi, not politicians, but insiders. Close. Constant. That man was Marcus Dalton. But who was he really? The name didn't appear in any official court circulars. No formal royal household position. No press credentials. Not even a LinkedIn profile. Just a quiet, almost ghost-like presence that began appearing around Camilla in late 2023. First as a liaison coordinator, then a Commonwealth cultural advisor, later still as a personal aide-de-camp. But those labels were fog. Because in reality, Marcus had been embedded far earlier. Insiders now confirm he first entered royal orbit nearly 6 years prior. And the one who vouched for him? King Charles himself. Let that sink in. Charles, patron of 1,000 charities, passionate about young talent, obsessed with legacy, took a liking to Marcus early. They met at an event on sustainable farming. Charles was speaking. Marcus, representing a high-profile agriculture tech firm, asked a question that impressed the king so much, he requested a private follow-up. What followed was a whirlwind of mentorship. Charles offered Marcus access, brought him into the fold, let him sit in on high-level meetings, introduced him to ambassadors, foreign dignitaries, even Pope Francis at one point. He was like a golden boy, one palace official later said. Brilliant, discreet, hungry. And Charles saw him as the future. Someone who could modernize the monarchy from within. And Camilla? She wasn't impressed at first. According to sources, she called Marcus too perfect in private, said he reminded her of the type Diana would have adored. Polished, polite, a little too good to be true. But that wariness faded. By 2022, Camilla began relying on Marcus more than anyone else. He helped manage her foundation work, assisted with press strategy, coordinated fashion stylists, even picked out speeches. Then, Australia, where a professional closeness transformed into something else entirely. But here's the part no one expected. It wasn't just an affair. It was manipulation. Emotional, strategic, layered. Because Marcus wasn't just charming. He was calculated. He knew exactly how to make Camilla feel needed. Those inside say she'd been increasingly isolated. The press remained cold. William still refused to fully embrace her. Harry and Meghan ignored her existence entirely. Even Charles, distracted by the demands of kingship, had grown distant. Camilla was lonely. And Marcus stepped into the void. He complimented her intelligence, listened, made her feel powerful, whispered about her influence in the Commonwealth. And in private moments, according to one palace cleaner, they had a rhythm, like two people who'd been through war together. And then he crossed the line. It didn't start in Australia. It started in Balmoral, a hunting trip, mid-autumn. Charles away in London for state business. Marcus coordinating staff on behalf of the Queen Consort. A late-night fire, whiskey, and, reportedly, a conversation that turned intimate. She was always so careful, a source said. But Marcus made her forget. He made her feel young again. Now ask yourself, was it love, or was it leverage? Because what we now know is this. Marcus wasn't just playing Camilla. He was collecting data, emails, call logs, internal schedules, notes from private meetings, even details from Charles's confidential briefings. According to palace cybersecurity consultants, brought in discreetly after the Sydney incident, Marcus accessed 3 levels of internal communication systems. How? He used Camilla's credentials. She gave him access, trusted him completely, even when her own security team raised concerns. The head of that team, a decorated MI5 liaison, quietly resigned in early 2024. No explanation, no statement. Gone. Camilla reportedly begged Charles to keep it out of the press. He did, but the cracks were showing. Marcus wasn't a royal romance. He was a Trojan horse. And by the time Charles realized it, it was already too late. There's a theory, one whispered by intelligence insiders, that Marcus was planted, not by a foreign government, but by a political faction inside Britain. Their motive? To destabilize the monarchy, to expedite a transition of power, to push forward a republic agenda. Especially as the king's approval ratings wavered. Wild theory. Maybe. But here's what we do know. Marcus disappeared after Sydney. Just like Camilla. Same 48-hour window. Same final digital ping. From a private terminal at an undisclosed Middle Eastern airport. No travel records. No credit card activity. No mobile data since. And guess what? Interpol now has an open file under MD, flagged for intelligence cross-checks related to possible cyber-political infiltration. It's real. And yet the palace remains silent. No charges. No confirmations. Just a locked room of silence. But inside that room, Charles is raging. Because this betrayal wasn't just personal. It was systemic. He had raised this man, mentored him, given him the keys to the kingdom. And Marcus? He stole the crown's soul. Now imagine being Charles. Alone, Publicly humiliated, strategically exposed, privately heartbroken. Your queen betrayed you. Your protégé exploited you. Your court is fractured. And the nation? Watching, waiting, whispering. Which brings us to now. Camilla is still missing from public life. Her legal team has gone quiet. No divorce has been formally filed. But palace insiders say Charles hasn't spoken a word to her since the night he received that letter. Meanwhile, Marcus remains a ghost. And yet, just when Charles thought he'd seen the worst of it, a package arrives at Clarence's house. No sender, no postage, hand-delivered. Inside, a USB drive. On it, a folder. Encrypted. Label, the interview. Password protected. When the palace tech team cracked it days later, they found something so shocking, so damaging, that Charles reportedly threw his tea against the wall when he saw the first 2 minutes. What was it? A private interview. Marcus, on camera, alone, speaking directly to the lens. And what he says in those opening moments could tear the monarchy apart. Because next, we uncover what Marcus revealed, what secrets he recorded, what threats he made, and why he claims that if Charles retaliates, he'll release it all. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the betrayal Charles suffered wasn't entirely new, but a long overdue echo from the past? A haunting reminder that Diana never truly left the palace? That her absence was still the loudest presence in the room? Because in the days following Camilla's collapse of loyalty, Charles wasn't just dealing with scandal. He was dealing with something far worse. Memory. A memory he'd tried to bury beneath state obligations, official portraits, and neatly curated press releases. But betrayal has a way of resurrecting the dead. And Diana, beloved, broken, betrayed, returned like a ghost through every corridor of Charles's mind. It began with the envelope, the same one Camilla had left on the table. What few people knew is that inside that envelope wasn't just a confession. There was a second, smaller note. Unattached, unmarked, and it wasn't written in Camilla's handwriting. It was Diana's. A copy of a letter she had once written, one the palace thought had been lost in the chaos of her death. But Camilla had kept it. For years. Hidden. Preserved. Read and reread, like a trophy or a talisman. And now, she had returned it to Charles. Why? Guilt? Spite? A final chess move? The note was dated 1996, shortly after the divorce was finalized. It read, "One day, you'll look at her and see me. Not because I'm there, but because of what she did. You'll remember what betrayal feels like when it comes wearing a smile." Charles stared at the page for hours. That letter, combined with Camilla's confession, cracked something inside him. Not just anger, not just grief. It was recognition. Recognition that he had, in some twisted act of fate, become Diana, the one betrayed. The one cast aside. The one mocked behind closed doors. He once thought he understood her pain, but he hadn't. Not really. Not until now. And suddenly, everything changed. The flashbacks came hard and fast. Diana's tears in Kensington Palace. Her voice trembling in interviews. That iconic panorama moment. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. Only now, there were 3 again. Charles, Camilla, and Marcus. The symmetry was brutal. The irony? Almost Shakespearean. But that wasn't the only ghost creeping through the palace halls. Because Diana's name started surfacing again, not just in Charles's mind, but in the public consciousness. Talk shows replayed her old interviews. TikTok resurrected her most candid quotes. And royal watchers noticed something eerie. Every time a new scandal broke about Camilla, Diana trended. It was as if the people were recrowning her, posthumously, as the queen she never got to be. And Charles? He noticed. In meetings. In public walkabouts. In letters from the public. They didn't ask how he was coping. They asked, "What do you think Diana would have said about all this?" And that, perhaps, was the cruelest blow. Because Charles had spent decades trying to rewrite history, to rehabilitate his image, to show the world that he had loved, that he had changed, that he deserved forgiveness. And now, the court of public opinion had flipped again. Suddenly, he was the Diana. And Camilla was, well, Camilla. But it didn't end there. Because Diana's presence wasn't just emotional. It was tactical. Behind the scenes, palace aides discovered something buried deep in the royal archives. A series of letters Diana had written to her lawyer in the months before her death. Some were personal, others strategic. One stood out. It referenced a list, names of people she didn't trust, people she believed were working to sabotage her even after the divorce. Guess what? Marcus Dalton's father was on that list. A retired intelligence officer, linked, albeit loosely, to the surveillance program that tracked Diana in the 90s. Charles had no idea, but when the connection was revealed to him by an internal briefing, he reportedly turned white. One aide described it like this. It was like watching a man see a ghost in real time. He just whispered. She was right. The implications were devastating. If Marcus's father had ties to the team that monitored Diana, and now Marcus had seduced Camilla, what did that mean? Was it generational vengeance? A long game of infiltration? Or just a cruel coincidence? Charles didn't believe in coincidences anymore, and neither did the Archbishop of Canterbury, because at the next scheduled meeting between Charles and the church, a shocking revelation was made. A recording, archival, previously buried, Diana's voice, captured during a spiritual counseling session. In it, she spoke not of revenge, but warning. Charles is too trusting, she said. He believes he can love someone into loyalty, but love doesn't fix betrayal. It just delays it. Those words shook Charles to the core. He had once brushed off her intuition as emotional volatility, but now it felt prophetic. And then came the final blow. A package, anonymous, left at the gates of Highgrove House. Inside, a first-edition copy of Diana's biography by Andrew Morton. Annotated. Dozens of pages marked with fresh ink. Not Diana's handwriting. Camilla's. The annotations weren't apologies. They were rebuttals, scribbled in margins. She manipulated the press. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted out. And on one page, the page where Diana details Charles's affair with Camilla, was a single line, underlined in red. And now he knows how it feels. Charles lost it. One witness described the king slamming the book shut so hard, the spine cracked. He reportedly walked out into the Highgrove Gardens, alone, barefoot, for over an hour. No security, no aides, just grief. Grief not just for a dead wife, but for a dead marriage, a dead illusion, a dead part of himself. The part that believed redemption was possible, that believed the public would ever forgive, that believed he had moved beyond Diana's shadow, because now, he was the shadow, and the monarchy, more fragile than ever. But even as Charles spiraled, something else emerged. A file, leaked to the BBC, marked, confidential, 1997. Inside, a never-before-seen photo of Diana, at a private event, standing beside a young man. His name? Marcus Dalton, age 17, too young to be involved, too connected to ignore. And suddenly, the past wasn't just a ghost. It was a bloodline, a legacy of secrets, a cycle repeating. And before Charles could react, a private email appeared in his royal inbox. No greeting, no sign-off, just one sentence. She was never just your ghost. She was our reckoning. What did it mean? Was it from Marcus? From Camilla? From someone else entirely? Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the real war wasn't just between Charles and Camilla, but between two brothers, one burning with righteous fury, the other eerily, suspiciously quiet? The monarchy had been rocked. The footage from Sydney, the resurfaced Diana letter, the ghost of betrayal hovering over Clarence House like a funeral shroud. But no one was prepared for what happened when the king's sons found out. Because if you thought Charles's heartbreak was bad, wait until you see how William reacted. It started with a text, not a formal call, not a briefing, not even a private aide delicately informing him. Just a brutal, unfiltered message from a friend in the media. Mate, have you seen this? Attached, a blurry still from the Sydney rooftop video. Camilla. Marcus. The kiss. William didn't respond. He didn't breathe. He didn't blink for several seconds. Then, he exploded. Palace aides say the Prince of Wales roared. Not shouted. Not argued. Roared. Furniture was reportedly smashed. An antique lamp, a coronation gift, shattered against the stone wall of his Kensington office. And his words? Chilling. She's undone everything. Everything. Years of diplomacy. Carefully rebranded legacy. The public's gradual, if reluctant, acceptance of Camilla. Gone. In an instant. William was not just angry. He was humiliated. Because this wasn't just about Charles being betrayed. This was about the crown, his future, being undermined by the very woman they had worked so hard to rehabilitate. But here's the twist. It wasn't betrayal that enraged William the most. It was the weakness it revealed in the monarchy, the vulnerability, the leakiness, the exposure to ridicule. In William's world, control is everything. Discipline, duty, containment. Camilla's actions had burned that to the ground. And so, William did what no one expected. He demanded an emergency meeting, not with Charles, with the Privy Council. Let that settle. The heir to the throne bypassed his father, went straight to the constitutional advisors, and allegedly asked what it would take to trigger a regency clause, a rare move that would allow him to act in Charles's stead if the king was deemed emotionally compromised. They told him the threshold was high, but William had made his point. The fury wasn't just personal. It was political. He was ready to take charge, publicly, if needed. But Charles, ever the strategist, stayed silent. No confrontation, no meeting with his son, just an unspoken standoff. And into that silence came Harry, or rather, the absence of Harry. Because while William boiled, Harry stayed silent. No public comment, no leaked statements, no shady sources close to the Sussexes planting spin. Just eerie, deliberate quiet. And that, for many, was the most unsettling part of all. Why wasn't Harry speaking? After all, Camilla was never his ally. Diana's son. The one who never truly forgave Charles. The one who called the royal family a cage wrapped in privilege. If ever there was a moment for Harry to strike, to vindicate his mother's legacy, to say, "I told you so" to the world, this was it. But he didn't. He stayed in Montecito, surfaced only once, at a children's charity gala, smiling awkwardly, brushing off questions with a tight, rehearsed line. Family matters are private. Private? Since when? This is the man who released a memoir, who spilled royal secrets to Oprah, who detailed frostbite in vivid, cringeworthy detail. Now, when the biggest royal scandal in decades erupts, he's gone mute. Theories swirled. One claimed Meghan had imposed a strict gag order. Another alleged Harry had privately reached out to Camilla in support. The internet broke. Was Harry defending the Queen Consort? Was he striking a secret deal? Or was he involved? Because here's where the story gets strange. A private investigator, working independently for a media outlet, discovered a curious detail. Marcus Dalton, Camilla's alleged lover, had once served on the same diplomatic delegation as Meghan Markle during her pre-royal humanitarian work. Their paths had crossed. Photos exist. Grainy. Background moments. But they were at the same cocktail reception in Toronto in 2015. And guess who arranged Meghan's invitation to that event? A mutual friend. A London-based media consultant known to have advised both Meghan and Marcus. Coincidence? Maybe. But in a world of royal intrigue, nothing is coincidence. Especially not when stakes are this high. Inside the palace, William demanded answers. Not just about Camilla. About Harry. What did he know? When did he know it? Why wasn't he saying anything? And perhaps the ugliest question of all, had Harry helped leak the footage? Think about it. Harry, still seething over being frozen out. Still nursing old wounds. Watching the monarchy struggle. Waiting for his moment. Was this it? A final power play? Or was Harry, for once, innocent? Some insiders believe Harry's silence is genuine. That he's stunned. That he sees this as proof he was right to leave. That the institution is so rotten, so compromised, it's collapsing under its own weight. But if that were true, why did he send a private letter to Clarence House just 2 days after the scandal broke? Yes, a letter. Handwritten, delivered by courier. And not to Charles, to Camilla. Its contents remained secret. But one palace source, anonymously, claimed it contained only 2 sentences. Both chilling. You always knew how this would end. I forgive you, but I won't protect you. Let that echo. Forgiveness, without protection. A line drawn in royal sand. Charles reportedly never saw the letter. But Camilla? She kept it. In her handbag. At all times. Even as she vanished from public view. Meanwhile, William ramped up. He began reshaping his public narrative. Increased appearances, speeches on leadership, tours with Catherine, interviews subtly contrasting his stability with his father's uncertainty. In every photo, he looked like a man waiting, preparing, stepping in without stepping over. But behind that calm exterior, he was still boiling. Not just at Camilla, not just at Marcus, but at the very system that allowed this to happen. He started attending meetings with the Royal Foundation late at night, quiet strategy sessions, future-proofing, preparing for what many now see as inevitable. A fractured monarchy, two crowns, one faltering, one rising, and caught in the middle, Diana's sons, one loud with rage, one silent with secrets, and neither speaking to the king. But before William could make his next move, before Harry could release his next memoir, before Charles could confront either of them, another figure entered the scene, one the public hadn't seen in years, one whose arrival at Buckingham Palace, unannounced, unescorted, triggered a total lockdown. A woman in navy, sharp heels, hair tied back, eyes cold as frost. Lady Sarah McCorquodale, Diana's eldest sister, Diana's confidant. And now, Charles's reckoning. Because what she brought with her wasn't just memory, it was evidence. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the woman the world dismissed as the royal mistress turned queen was never just a passive player in this saga? What if, instead, she was calculating her revenge, not with swords, but with secrets? Because while the monarchy flailed under Charles's silence, and the nation split between outrage and morbid curiosity, Camilla Parker Bowles was not hiding. She was loading the gun. Not literally, but figuratively? Oh, absolutely. They said she was in seclusion, that she had fled to Mill House, that she was fragile, unwell, processing. But behind those stone walls in Wiltshire, a very different operation was unfolding. A war room, a publicist flown in from New York, used by high-profile Hollywood damage control artists, a veteran libel lawyer from a firm that had once defended Rupert Murdoch, and most shocking of all, a ghostwriter. Yes, Camilla was preparing a memoir. Working title, The Other Side of the Crown. A title laced with poison and poetry. Now pause. Ask yourself, why would Camilla, in the middle of a royal implosion, accused of betrayal, exposed by leaked footage, risk going nuclear? Why not apologize? Why not disappear? Because she's not built that way. Camilla has been dragged through the mud since the 1980s, labeled the Rottweiler, blamed for Diana's heartbreak, reviled by the press, booed at public events, humiliated again and again. And yet she won. She married the future king. She became queen consort. She stood beside Charles at the coronation in Westminster Abbey with a diamond crown on her head and a nation at her feet. If only reluctantly, she endured. And she wasn't about to lose all of that without a fight. Especially not to Charles. Not to the public. Not to Diana's ghost. So how did the counterattack begin? Quietly. First, a carefully leaked photo. Camilla, walking the gardens at Mill. Hair windswept. No makeup. Wrapped in a cashmere shawl. Reading a leather-bound journal. The caption? She's hurt. But she's not hiding. It went viral. Then, a whisper campaign. Anonymous quotes in broadsheets. She made sacrifices for him. She stayed when he was unbearable. She covered for things the public never saw. She's no villain. She's just human. Then came the lawyer letters. 5 prominent tabloid editors received thinly veiled warnings. Any further character assassination will be pursued with full legal recourse. Some backed off. Others doubled down. But the message was clear. Camilla was not retreating. She was rewriting. And then came the podcast. Yes, you heard that right. Plans emerged for Camilla to record a limited series podcast, exploring the burdens of royal life and the cost of public judgment. 1 episode already scripted, a letter never sent, her alleged reply to Diana, written in 1997 and never published. According to one insider, it begins like this. I never wanted to be your enemy, but neither of us were given a real choice, were we? It's not humility, it's weaponized vulnerability. But here's where it gets truly dangerous. Because Camilla wasn't just working on her own image. She was threatening Charles. Behind palace doors, an ultimatum was reportedly delivered through her lawyer. If the king proceeds with any formal divorce or revokes my title, I will release what I know. What she knows. It's apparently vast. She claims to possess letters from Charles during their affair, explicit, impulsive, unfit for publication. Audio recordings of late-night palace phone calls. A private diary entry referencing Charles's alleged involvement in silencing a former staffer who threatened to go to the press about a 1994 scandal. And worst of all, A rumored video. A moment captured in the early 2000s. When Charles, under stress, allegedly made deeply inappropriate comments about the Queen Mother's mental state. It was recorded by accident. Forgotten. Until now. And Camilla? She has a copy. Now ask yourself, is it blackmail? Or is it insurance? Because Camilla knows the system. She knows how fragile royal perception is. And she knows, better than anyone, how to turn scandal into sympathy. But don't mistake strategy for stability. Because behind the tactical moves, Camilla was unraveling. One source close to her household confessed. She barely sleeps. She drinks more than usual. She watches old news coverage obsessively. She reads letters from the public, both hateful and supportive, until her hands shake. She's falling apart while holding the gun. Charles, aware of the retaliation forming, refused to engage. He refused her calls. He refused mediation. He even reportedly told aides, "She's already buried herself. Let her dig." But his silence? It wasn't strength. It was paralysis. Because he knew something no one else did. Camilla had access to his secrets too. Personal letters from his youth. Journals from the darkest days after Diana's death. Even recorded therapy sessions, conducted with royal-approved clinicians during his breakdown in 2005. Yes, you read that correctly. Camilla, once his lifeline, had become his liability. And Charles? He had no idea who else she'd shared things with. Because 2 weeks after her isolation at Ray Mill began, a mysterious email arrived at the offices of Netflix UK. Subject line: Her Majesty. Her version. Attached, a synopsis. 6-part docuseries. Unnamed narrator. Multiple insider interviews. And a familiar production company. One linked to the same producers behind The Crown. A bluff? Maybe. A warning? Absolutely. The palace scrambled. An emergency legal team was assembled. Royal courtiers reached out through back channels, appealing to Netflix to block any unvetted royal content without pre-established approval. But the streamer? Silent. And Camilla? Still nowhere to be seen. Until one evening, a soft whisper hit social media. A woman, mid-60s, was spotted boarding a private jet at Farnborough Airport, wrapped in navy, oversized sunglasses, clutching a red leather journal. Destination? Undisclosed. But flight logs suggested the south of France. Was it a retreat? An exile? Or something far more explosive? Because that very same day, a letter was delivered to Lambeth Palace, the residence of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Handwritten. Signed, CPB. Its contents? Unknown. But what we do know is that following the letter, the Archbishop canceled 3 days of public events, citing urgent spiritual deliberations. Coincidence? No such thing in royal drama. Especially when, hours later, Buckingham Palace confirmed that all future public engagements for Queen Camilla were suspended until further notice. No explanation. No timeline. No visibility. Just a ghost where the Queen once stood. And then, just as the UK began adjusting to the void, a trailer dropped. No warning. No lead-up. Just 30 seconds of cinematic tension. The screen fades in. A woman's voice. Camilla's voice. Whispering. They told you one version of the story. Now it's time for mine. Cut to black. Title card. The Other Side of the Crown, coming soon. And with that, the Queen declared war. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming.